I'm not sure when it started, this feeling of unease whenever he's near me. It's like a hum in the air, a tension that prickles my skin and makes every breath feel a little sharper. Let me introduce myself. I'm Lily, 20 years old, and I live with my uncle since everything fell apart. My parents are gone now, their faces fading from memory, replaced by his Uncle Max. He's been my anchor, my family ever since the accident. Until recently. He's always been affectionate, tactile even. Hugs that lingered a little too long, hands that rested on my shoulders or waist just a beat too long. But it was comfortable, familiar. Like our own language, one only we spoke. But lately, things have changed. It's in the way his eyes follow me around the room, like he's trying to solve a puzzle he can't quite figure out. In the way his voice dips lower when he talks to me, softer, almost conspiratorial. There was the night I found him sitting on my bed, the moonlight casting shadows on his face as he stared at my sleeping form. He looked up when I entered, a strange expression on his face, something between surprise and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Couldn't sleep? I'd asked, leaning against the doorframe. He'd shaken his head slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I was just thinking about how much you've grown, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he stood up abruptly, brushing past me without another word. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, I felt it again, that hum of unease. Something had shifted between us, a subtle realignment that left me feeling off-kilter. And then there was the day at the pool. The sun beat down on us, its heat seeping into every pore as we laughed and splashed in the water. He dove under, his strong arms cutting through the blue, emerging near where I floated on my back. I felt him before I saw him. That hum again, stronger now, making my heart pound in my chest. Then his hands were on me, warm and sure, lifting me out of the water as if I weighed nothing at all. Our faces were inches apart, his eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something else. Something raw and intense that made my breath catch. But then he let go, pushing me away playfully, breaking the spell. "Race you to the other end," he called out, already swimming away. And I followed, eager to put some distance between us, confused by what had just happened, or almost happened. These moments feel like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the table, each one too small to make sense on its own. But together, I don't know what picture they'll form when they're finally fitted together. Because here's the thing, my uncle can't keep his eyes off me. Or maybe it's just that I can't keep mine off him. Either way, something's changing between us, shifting in ways that scare me and excite me all at once. And that's why, when he asked me to go for a drive with him tonight, I said yes without hesitation. Because I need answers. I need to understand what's happening here before it consumes us both. Before we cross a line there's no coming back from. So here we are, speeding down the dark highway, the headlights cutting through the night like knives. His hand rests on my knee, casual but possessive, as he tells me stories of when I was little. And all I can think about is how much has changed since then. How much is still changing. Because this feels like a choice point. One road leads to familiarity, safety, and the life we've always known. The other feels dangerous, uncertain, but somehow irresistible. And as I look at him, his profile silhouetted against the passing streetlights, I realize that no matter which road we take, nothing will ever be the same again. So buckle up, folks, because tonight's just the beginning. Tonight, we drive towards the unknown, towards answers and consequences, and whatever comes next. Because sometimes, you have to step into the dark to find out what lurks within. And God help me, I'm ready to see what we'll find. But first, let me take one last deep breath, steel myself for what's to come, and prepare to dive headfirst into this new reality. After all, there's no turning back now. Not when the wheels are in motion, not when the hum has become a roar, and not when my uncle can't keep his hands off me. Not when I'm not sure if he should. One evening, as I sat on the couch reading, he joined me, settling close enough for our thighs to touch. His fingers played absently with my hair, twirling strands around them before releasing them again. It felt nice, too nice. "Max," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What are we doing?" He paused, his hand stilling in my hair. Then slowly, he turned towards me, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know, Jakey," he said softly, using the nickname only he used. "But I can't seem to stop." My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at him, really looked at him. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, and there was a weariness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "Why?" I asked, needing to understand, needing to know if this thing between us was real or just some strange fantasy we'd both spun out of loneliness and grief. He sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "I don't know," he repeated. "Maybe it's because you're all I have left too. Maybe it's because I've always seen you as more than just my niece." He paused, his eyes never leaving mine. "Or maybe it's because I'm falling in love with you." The words hung heavy between us, a weight that settled on my chest and made it hard to breathe. Love? Was that what this was? Moksh. I started, uncertain of how to respond. But he silenced me with a finger pressed softly against my lips. "No," he said, his voice low. "Don't say anything now. Just think about it. About us." He stood up then, leaving me alone on the couch with my thoughts whirling like a storm in my head. I watched him retreat down the hallway, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, as if carrying an unseen burden. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I needed answers about him, about us, about this thing that felt both terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I found him in his study, bent over a stack of papers. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face before he quickly masked it. "What is it, Jakey?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Taking a deep breath, I stepped further into the room, closing the door softly behind me. "I want to know," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies rioting in my stomach. "I want to know everything." He raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. "About you and Mom," I clarified, my gaze never wavering from his. "About why you were so close, about whether there was ever something more between you two." His expression darkened briefly before he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said finally, resignation heavy in his voice. "But it's not pretty, Jakey. Our relationship, it was complicated." He motioned for me to sit down across from him, and as I did, I braced myself for what was to come. Because somehow, I knew that the truth would change everything, either binding us closer together or shattering whatever fragile bond we'd formed. But I had to know, for my sake and his, and maybe, just maybe, for ours. "What do you mean?" My voice barely above a whisper, my heart still racing from the sudden change in his demeanor. He looked away then, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. The rain pounded against the glass, each drop a drumbeat underscoring the tension between us. "Max," I prodded softly when he didn't respond. He sighed, running a hand through his hair before turning back to face me. "I can't do this, Jakey," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not now, not like this." Confusion warred with frustration within me. "But you just said, you told me you were falling in love with me." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, a stark reminder of the vulnerability I'd laid bare mere hours ago. He nodded, his eyes filled with pain. "I am," he admitted. "God help me, I am. But that doesn't make this right." Anger surged through me, hot and consuming. "Right? What's so wrong about us being together?" I demanded, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. He reached out, covering one of my fists with his hand. "Nothing," he said quietly, "except for the fact that you're my niece." The word hung between us like a guillotine, sharp and final. My breath caught in my throat as realization dawned on me. He was pushing me away because of some misguided sense of morality. "Max, please," I begged, uncaring of the desperation that laced my voice. "I don't care about that. I want to be with you." He shook his head sadly, removing his hand from mine. "And I want nothing more than to be with you too, Jakey. But I can't. Not when it would mean hurting so many people, your mother's memory, our family, and most importantly, you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, threatening to spill over. "But what about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "There is no us," he said firmly, his expression set in stone. "Not now, not ever. We can't rewrite our pasts, Jakey. And as much as it pains me to say this, we need to accept that." I felt the first tear slip down my cheek as I realized the full force of his words. He was pushing me away, denying us both what we wanted needed, in favor of some archaic notion of right and wrong. "But Max," I started, only for him to silence me with a look. "No," he said sternly. "We're not discussing this anymore. It's done, Jakey. We need to move on." I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces as the truth sank in. There was no us. There never had been, and there never would be. Our love story was doomed before it even began. With a final, lingering look at him, I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. "Fine," I said coldly, wiping away the tear that still clung to my cheek. "If that's what you want." It wasn't, of course. But I refused to beg any longer. If he couldn't see the truth, that our love was worth fighting for, then maybe it was better this way. I walked out of the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the storm raging outside. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a part of myself shut away too, locked deep within where no one could touch it. Because even though he'd broken my heart, I knew one thing for certain: I loved him. And despite everything, I always would. But for now, that love had to be enough. It had to sustain me through the pain and the heartache until I could find a way to move on from him, from us, from the love that never was. And so, with heavy footsteps and an even heavier heart, I began the long climb back up to my room, leaving behind the man who held the pieces of my shattered soul in his hands. As I stormed towards Max's bedroom, my heart pounded in my ears like a drumroll heralding an impending storm. Last night's conversation had left us at an impasse, our feelings laid bare, yet unresolved. I needed more from him. Answers, reassurance, anything to quiet the chaos raging inside me. His door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling onto the dark hallway. I pushed it open without knocking, finding him standing by the window, his silhouette framed against the moonlit night. He turned as I entered, surprise flickering across his face before it was replaced by wariness. "Jakey," he started, but I cut him off, my voice shaking with emotion. "I can't do this anymore, Max," I said, advancing into the room. "I can't live like this, torn between what I feel and what I'm supposed to feel." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Jakey," he began again, but I wouldn't let him placate me with empty words. "No," I snapped, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You don't get to dismiss this, not anymore. Not after last night." His expression hardened, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes that gave him away. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said softly. "But you did," I countered, closing the distance between us until we stood mere inches apart. "And now it's time for you to fix it." He searched my face, his gaze lingering on my lips before rising back up to meet my eyes. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say, about to ask. "By showing me that this isn't just some twisted fantasy," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "That we can be together, truly together, without all the guilt and fear." His eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning on his face. But before he could respond, I reached up, cupping his cheek in my hand and pulling him down towards me. Our lips met in a searing kiss, filled with pent-up longing and unspoken words. It was different from our first kiss, raw, urgent, desperate. His hands gripped my hips, pulling me flush against him as he deepened the kiss, exploring my mouth like a man starved for air. I gasped against his lips, feeling an ache build low in my belly as heat flooded through me. This was what I needed from him. Proof that our love wasn't wrong, wasn't dirty, but something pure and real. He must have felt it too, because he suddenly pulled back, breaking the kiss with a ragged breath. His eyes searched mine, questioning, seeking reassurance. "Jakey," he started, his voice hoarse with emotion. But I silenced him with another kiss, this one softer, sweeter. "Make love to me, Max," I whispered against his lips. "Show me that you want this, that we're meant for each other." He hesitated for a moment before nodding, his eyes filled with a mix of desire and trepidation. Then slowly, almost reverently, he began to undress me. His fingers trembled slightly as they traced the curve of my neck, the swell of my breasts, the flare of my hips. Each touch was like a brand, searing into my skin, marking me as his. And when I stood before him naked and vulnerable, he stepped back to admire me, his eyes dark with hunger. "God, Jakey," he murmured, his voice filled with wonder. "You're so beautiful." I blushed at the compliment, reaching for him once more. This time, there was no hesitation in his response. He swept me up into his arms, carrying me to the bed and laying me down gently. As he joined me on the mattress, our limbs tangling together, I felt a sense of rightness wash over me. This was where we were meant to be, together, connected in every way possible. He kissed me again, long and deep, as his hands explored my body with renewed urgency. He touched me like an artist sculpting clay, each stroke deliberate and purposeful, drawing gasps and moans from my lips. And when he finally entered me, it felt like coming home, warm, welcome, perfect. Our bodies moved in sync, our hearts beating as one as we lost ourselves in the dance of love. There were no words between us now, only the silent language of touch, the unspoken promise of forever. And as we crested the peak together, our cries mingling in the night air, I knew that everything would be all right. Because this us was real. It was right. And nothing could ever change that. In the aftermath, we lay entwined, our breaths slowly returning to normal. He traced idle patterns on my back as I listened to his heartbeat, feeling content and at peace. "What now?" I asked softly, tilting my head up to look at him. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "Now," he said, "we figure out how to navigate this together. No more running scared, no more hiding behind what we think people will say." I nodded, leaning into his touch. Together, I agreed. And as we drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, I knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, fears to face, decisions to make, and a future to forge together. But for now, there was only this. Us, united in love, ready to face whatever came next side by side. "But you did touch me," I pointed out, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "And not just by accident, Max. It happened too many times to be coincidence." He looked away then, his jaw clenching as if holding back some deep emotion. When he finally spoke, it was with a heavy sigh. "I can't explain that," he admitted quietly. "I wish I could, but I don't understand it myself." A chill ran down my spine at the admission. Not understanding why you do something is almost worse than doing it on purpose. "And what about Mom?" I asked suddenly, needing to know if she'd been aware of this strange dynamic between us. Did she notice? Did she say anything? He shook his head firmly.
"No."
"Your mother never mentioned anything like that to me." I felt a pang of sadness at the mention of her. If she hadn't noticed or hadn't wanted to acknowledge it, what did that mean for our relationship now? "But Jakey," he continued, turning to face me again, "that doesn't change the fact that I love you. You're like a daughter to me." The words cut deep, striking at the core of my fears and insecurities. If I was just a daughter to him, then why did his touches feel so different? So intimate? "And yet," I said softly, "you touch me differently than any father should touch their daughter." He looked away again, unable to deny it. "Max," I pressed on, needing answers even if they hurt. Do you have feelings for me? Romantic feelings?" His silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I don't know. Maybe. Yes." Each word seemed wrenched from him, painful to admit. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I absorbed his admission. This wasn't just about innocent touches anymore. This was something darker, more complex. But it's wrong, he hurried to add, seeing the expression on my face. I know that, Jakey. Believe me, I do. That's why I've been trying so hard to push you away, to keep a safe distance between us. His words should have reassured me, but they only served to fuel my confusion and hurt. If he truly loved me like a daughter, wouldn't he be able to maintain that boundary without forcing himself away from me? And what about me? I asked, my voice trembling. What am I supposed to do with all this? Just forget it ever happened? Pretend there's nothing between us. He reached out, taking my hand in his. But instead of comforting me, the gesture only served to highlight the charged atmosphere between us. I don't know what you're supposed to do, he admitted. All I know is that we can't act on these feelings. It would destroy everything. His words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the line we'd already crossed and the precipice we now teetered on. As I left his room that day, I couldn't help but feel like something fundamental had shifted between us. The love and affection I'd always known were still there, but now they were tainted by uncertainty and fear. And as much as I wanted to believe him when he said nothing could happen between us, part of me wondered if it was already too late. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and emotional turmoil. I found myself second-guessing every interaction with Max, analyzing each touch, each look for hidden meanings. Meanwhile, he seemed equally distraught, going out of his way to avoid being alone with me while also seeming unable to stay away entirely. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, lost in thought, he entered quietly. He hesitated at the doorway before approaching cautiously, like a man walking on eggshells. Jakey, he began softly, taking a seat next to me on the couch. We need to talk about this. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. He took a deep breath before continuing, choosing his words carefully. What happened between us? It can't happen again. You understand that, right? I bit my lip, nodding again. I think we should take some time apart, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Just until things settle down, until we can both think clearly again. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Time apart? That meant leaving him, leaving this house, these memories, our shared history. But what about you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Won't that be hard for you too? He looked away, his jaw clenching again. Yes, he admitted after a moment. It will be, but it's necessary. I wanted to argue, to beg him to reconsider, but what right did I have? He was trying to do the right thing, to protect us both from making a terrible mistake. Okay, I whispered, feeling tears threaten again. If that's what you think is best. He reached out, squeezing my hand briefly before letting go again. It is, he said firmly. And once some time has passed, we can figure out where to go from here. Together. But even as he said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about taking a break. This was about severing the bond that had grown between us, however twisted and forbidden it might be. As I packed my bags later that night, I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever truly go back to normal between us. Or if our love, pure, complicated, and deeply flawed, would forever hang like a dark cloud over our relationship. I sit here now, in this quiet room, the echoes of our past clinging to every corner like shadows. I think about Max, his laugh, his strength, his warmth. And I think about me, about how far I've come since that first moment we crossed a line. There are times when I regret it all, the touches, the words left unspoken, the love that dared not speak its name. But there are other moments, too, when I remember the comfort of his arms around me, the safety I felt in his presence. Those memories aren't so easy to dismiss. I've asked myself 1,000 times if it was love or something darker. If we were twisted, tainted by our shared past. Or maybe we were just two lost souls reaching out for comfort in an unfamiliar world. But does it matter now? The lines are blurred, the boundaries shattered. All that's left is this emptiness inside me, a chasm carved by uncertainty and regret. I've kept something from you all this time, a secret buried deep beneath layers of self-denial and fear. You see, It wasn't just Max who felt this connection between us. I did too. Oh, I tried to fight it, God knows I did. But every time he touched me, every time his gaze lingered a little too long, I felt something stir inside me. A warmth, a pull, an undeniable urge to draw closer. And one night, when the house was dark and silent, I acted on that urge. I slipped into his room, my heart pounding in my chest, and woke him with a touch. Jakey. His voice was heavy with sleep, confused but not surprised. As if he'd been expecting me all along. I didn't say anything, just pressed my lips to his in a hesitant kiss. He stiffened beneath me, shock coursing through him like electricity. But then he kissed me back, tentative at first before growing bolder, more insistent. It was wrong, oh God, it was so wrong. But it felt right too, like two pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. So here we are, Max and I, bound together by our shared past and the secret that hangs between us like a noose. We've tried to move on, to build new lives for ourselves apart from each other. But how do you move forward when part of your heart is still tied to someone else? I don't know what the future holds for us, if we'll ever find our way back to each other, or if we're destined to remain forever trapped in this limbo, bound by love and regret. But I do know this. Whatever happens next, it won't be easy. It won't be simple. But maybe, just maybe, it will be worth it. This is where our story ends, but not yours. Tell me, dear reader, what you think happened next. Where did Max and I go from here? What lessons did we learn? What demons did we face? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this journey together. Because after all, every story is just a conversation waiting to happen. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster. It's been one hell of a ride.